The gate clanged shut like a gunshot lights from the sheriff's cruiser washing over the gravel. And there I was, with one hand on the lock and the other on my temper, watching Karen scream about her kids while those two stood on my lawn with melting popsicles and big eyes that said even they knew this wasn't normal. You know what I mean? I'd spent months dealing with letters, drones, drive-by inspections, with no badges. The whole HOA theater, even though my house sits on a private road outside their jurisdiction. And the minute I put in an automatic lock to keep random playdates from happening on my property, yeah, that happened. The sheriff rolled down his window, glanced at the no trespassing sign, and my notarized deed. Then at Karen, and you could see it on his face. This wasn't an emergency. This was entitlement hitting a fence for the first time. I kept my voice low and steady. Told him the kids were fine. Water and shade right there. I'd opened the gate the second their mother stepped behind the property line and stopped yelling about calling the mayor, the fire department, and whoever else she thought could turn my yard into a public park. And when she finally shuffled back, I hit the remote. The gate eased open, and those kids ran to her like ducklings. Embarrassed and relieved all at once. That should have been the end. But we all know folks like Karen don't back up easy. So the very next day, a crisp envelope with the HOA seal slid under my gate, like it had legal legs. Some nonsense about community alignment and shared amenities, and between the flowery language and the thinly veiled threats, it basically said my yard was perfect for children. So I should integrate, or they'd make life difficult. And I remember laughing because it was so brazen, it almost felt like a prank, except it wasn't. I took that letter into town. Met a friend who knows county records like the back of her hand, and over greasy burgers and terrible coffee she found something most folks would have missed. A thin strip on the county map, an old sliver of land tied to my parcel that the HOA's main road crosses tiny, but real. Not a threat, not a weapon, just leverage. That said, hey, this isn't your sandbox. I filed a clarification to make it crystal clear. Came home and started wiring cameras along the fence, the gate, even the back line where the drones like to buzz. Not because I wanted a show, but because I knew the show was coming. Sure enough, a man in a polo shirt showed up with a clipboard, couldn't name an agency. Muttered something about the association took photos like a nervous tourist and left faster than he came after I told him he was trespassing. I logged it with the sheriff and added the footage to what I started calling my proof pile. A neighbor who'd had enough of the bullying slipped me photocopied minutes from their meeting handwritten notes in the margins about turning my property into a community play space. And that night, sitting on the porch with my dog, sleeping at my feet and the goats fussing in their pen, I felt the anger settle into something colder. Strategy. Then came the letters from a law office 2 towns over. Thick with accusations dressed up in legalese, demanding arbitration, like I was a rogue member of their club. And I answered once certified mail deed and zoning attached, copied the sheriff. And after that, their tone turned smaller. Because the thing about bullies is they get loud when they think you're alone, and quiet when they realize you're keeping records. Karen pivoted to theater daily walks to my gate, with her kids right at the bars. Cameras out, like she was filming a PSA, little staged moments that never quite played the way she wanted, because the footage shows what it shows. Kids safe me, calm her narrating a story reality refused to support. When she grabbed a bullhorn one Saturday and handed out flyers saying a dangerous man lived here. The deputy gave her a citation for disturbing the peace, and neighbors started filming back, posting clips that made the whole thing look less like a crusade and more like a tantrum. That's when the big scene rolled up. 2 patrol cars and a county inspector's truck. Karen waving them down like she was the mayor, pointing at my gate and yelling about emergency access and historic pathways. And I walked out with a folder, handed the inspector my deed. The recorded easement clarification. The inspector's eyes tracked the boundary lines. He nodded slow. Said the gate was legal and compliant, not under HOA jurisdiction. And when she said I must have bribed someone, he shrugged, like a man who's seen enough to stop being surprised. The sheriff leaned on his cruiser, smiled when she brought up my allegedly dangerous goats, said they looked pretty calm on the footage he'd seen. And the neighbors laughed, not cruelly, just tired of the act. A local reporter I'd emailed earlier showed up later that week. We walked the perimeter. I told the story without spice. She checked the records. And when her piece went live, when HOA overreach meets a locked gate, it spread across forums and morning radio with a tone I appreciated. Not angry, just clear. I knew the courtroom was coming because when folks lose the narrative, they try to rent authority. And a process server finally handed me a fat packet on my porch. An emergency injunction full of old claims dressed up in new fonts. Child endangerment, public easement, environmental hazards. All the greatest hits. And we walked into that county courtroom with a battered briefcase and a calm we'd earned. The judge, a dry man with a sense of humor that sneaks up on you, listened for about 2 minutes before asking the one question that mattered. What jurisdiction does an HOA have over a non-HOA property? And when they admitted none, no easement on file, no agreement. He read my deed, and the county letter glanced at the photos, then dismissed the motion with prejudice, warned about sanctions for abuse of process. If this circus came back, and when Karen tried to speak over him, he tapped the gavel lightly. Not angry, just done. Outside, the reporter asked for a comment, and all I said was the law works because sometimes the simplest thing is the truest. After that, the sheriff's office called about a restraining order, asked if I'd testify to the pattern, and a week later, Karen was served in front of the clubhouse papers in her hand and a porch camera somewhere, catching the moment the story shifted from theater to consequences. 50 feet, no contact, no wiggle room. The HOA board started leaking like a boat with too many holes. Emails about removing her, about liability, about how far they'd let this go. And the neighborhood, which had been holding its breath for months, exhaled. Little waves from porches. A shy smile from Mrs. Lieberman, who'd once avoided eye contact in the produce aisle. A printout of the article left at my gate, with a smiley face drawn in blue pen. And then, one afternoon, after the hearing, after the radio jokes about goats and gates, after the quiet that follows a storm, Karen pulled up alone, parked at the line, and stepped out with an envelope she held. Like it weighed a ton, said she wanted to deliver a final statement. Said she was returning the photos she'd blasted online. Said the board had removed her, and she was resigning effective immediately. And for the first time since this started, there wasn't anger in her eyes, just exhaustion. And she stayed outside the restraining order line and set the envelope on the post like it was a white flag. Then turned and left. We had a small neighborhood barbecue that evening. Burgers and lemonade under the shade trees, with laughing on the safe side of the inner fence where the goats can't get nibbly. And for the first time in a long time, the gate felt less like a barricade and more like what it should be. A boundary that means what it says. I walked the perimeter. At dusk, out of habit. Checked the latches and lights. Thought about how a loud hook became a slow, steady story about patience documentation and the kind of neighbors who stop being bystanders and start being witnesses. And I realized the twist wasn't just the court, or the restraining order, or the resignation. It was the part where I changed, too, from angry to methodical, from reactive to prepared, from alone to backed by a community that decided fair beats loud. Maybe that's what some folks don't understand about fences. They aren't about keeping the world out. They're about keeping your promise to the people and animals inside. And if you honor that promise with calm, with receipts, with respect for the law, the noise eventually burns itself out. You might disagree. Maybe you think I should have opened the gate quicker. Maybe you think I should have sued first and welded later. That's a fair debate. But where I stand under this porch light with the night finally quiet, I'll tell you what I learned. Boundaries matter, and how you hold them matters more. Not with rage, not with pettiness, but with steady hands and a paper trail that doesn't blink when the bullhorn gets loud. If this hit a nerve, if you've dealt with HOA games, a neighbor who thought your yard was theirs, or a moment where you had to hold a line and everyone watched, tell me how you handled it. Share your take, push back, if you think I missed it. And if you've got a story like this, drop it in the comments so the rest of us can learn what works when the shouting starts.